I was mourning my father's death while my husband was on a romantic getaway with his cousin, but he doesn't know I've already spoken to the hotel staff. I remember the exact moment the world as I knew it shattered into a million pieces. I had been sitting on the couch, wrapped in an oversized sweater, cradling my phone against my ear as I tried to hold back the tears my father had just passed away, and the weight of grief seemed almost too heavy to bear. My body ached from the sadness, and my mind wandered aimlessly, numb to everything around me. All I could think of was how unfair it was, my dad, gone forever, leaving me with nothing but memories. The world was supposed to make sense, but everything felt wrong of betrayal, revenge, and empower. Then, just as I was trying to find a sliver of peace, I heard it, the buzz of my phone. It was an anonymous message from an unknown number, but what it contained would change my life forever. The image that flashed across my screen wasn't one I had expected, let alone something I could prepare for. It was a picture of my husband, Jason, laughing on a sandy beach with another woman, his arm around her waist. Like he had never cared about me at all. There were no signs, no warnings, just a single damning snapshot that felt like a dagger in my chest. And the words that came with it is this: "Your cousin burned into my soul." The truth was out there staring me in the face. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was as if the air around me had thickened, making it impossible to swallow. Was this really happening? Had I been so blind to his lies? The man I had spent years building a life with, was he really out there on some romantic getaway? With someone else? It couldn't be true. Yes, couldn't, but as the reality of the situation sunk in, there was no denying the betrayal. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the evidence was right there, frozen in time. I sat there staring at the image, unable to process the flood of emotions crashing into me all at once: anger, disbelief, betrayal. It was like a storm had swept through my entire being. How could Jason do this to me, especially now when I was at my most vulnerable, mourning? The loss of my father, the pain from my grief was already unbearable. But this felt like a betrayal of a lifetime. My husband, the person I trusted more than anyone else, had slipped behind my back, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. I glanced over at his side of the bed, untouched and cold. He was supposed to be with me right now, helping me navigate through this impossible time, not off with another woman, pretending everything was normal. I should have noticed the signs, the late nights, the text he'd been deleting, the way he would always be too busy when I needed him most, but I had been so wrapped up in my own grief that I didn't see what was right in front of me. Maybe that was the most painful part. Not just the betrayal, but the realization that I had been so blind, so utterly consumed by my sorrow that I allowed it to happen. The worst part: he had the audacity to lie about it. When I confronted him just hours before his trip, Jason swore it was a business retreat. He even mentioned that his cousin would be there to keep him company. His words were smooth, rehearsed, and everything about them felt off, but I believed him. How could I have known otherwise? Who would think that their partner would deceive them during such a vulnerable time? I took a shaky breath and tried to calm my racing heart. I had to think. I needed to gather my thoughts before confronting him. How would I even begin to tell him that I knew the truth? I didn't know what hurt more: the fact that he was lying to my face, or the fact that he had so casually discarded me when I needed him the most. But as I looked at the photo again, a flicker of something darker began to rise within me. This wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. This was about making him understand the pain he had caused. This was about revenge. The thought of getting back at him made my blood boil. How dare he take this moment of grief and turn it into something so callous? I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. My father had passed away, and I had nothing left to lose. If Jason thought he could escape the consequences of his actions, he was sorely mistaken. I would make sure he felt the weight of his betrayal, every single ounce of it. But how could I make him pay without sinking to his level? The answer came to me, slowly, like a whisper at the back of my mind. It was simple. I would use his own lies against him. He had been so careless, so full of himself, assuming I would never find out. I would make him realize how wrong he was. But first I needed to be careful. I couldn't let him know I knew. Not yet. I needed to plan to execute my revenge with precision. Jason thought this was just going to blow over. He was gravely mistaken. I was about to become the woman he never saw coming, the one who would make him regret ever betraying me. But for now, I needed to take a deep breath and let the shock wash over me. I had to gather my strength. I would deal with him later. As I set my phone down, I realized one thing for certain. I wasn't going to just sit back and let this go. Jason had no idea what was coming his way, and by the time he realized, it would be too late. This was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning. It's strange how quickly everything can change, how life can pivot in an instant, flipping from peaceful to chaotic, from joyful to tragic. Just a few months ago, I thought I had it all. Everything seemed perfect. Jason and I were living the life we'd always dreamed of, a cozy home nestled in a quiet neighborhood. Friends, family, and most importantly, each other. But those quiet evenings, the soft laughter over dinner, and the plans we'd made for the future, all felt so distant now, like fragments of a dream that slipped through my fingers. How had it all unraveled so quickly? How had I failed to notice the cracks forming in the foundation of our relationship? Jason was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. He was kind, attentive, and seemed genuinely devoted to me. I had known him for years, and everything about him, from his smile to his mannerisms, had become a part of the rhythm of my life. We'd been married for 3 years, and in that time, I had never once doubted him. The idea of betrayal never even crossed my mind. He was my person, my best friend, the one I turned to when life got hard. The one I shared my deepest thoughts and dreams with. Our connection had always felt like something rare, something I had worked hard to nurture and protect. The beginning of our relationship had been straightforward. We met in college, where we instantly clicked. Our friends loved us together, always saying how perfect we were for each other. We spent our weekends exploring the city, finding new coffee shops and staying up late, talking about everything from politics to our childhood memories. As we grew older, our bond only deepened when Jason proposed. I didn't hesitate for a second. It was the happiest day of my life. We bought a house together soon after, a charming little place in the suburbs with a white picket fence and a dog we named Max. I could picture our future together, the family we would build, and the adventures we'd share. It was the life I had always dreamed of. But when my father got sick, everything changed. My world turned upside down. He was diagnosed with cancer, and within a matter of weeks, I became his primary caretaker. Jason was there for me at first, offering comfort and support, but as the months wore on, I began to feel a distance growing between us. It wasn't anything obvious. Just small things at first. He would come home late from work, claiming he had extra shifts to cover, or he'd become absorbed in his phone texting, or checking emails at all hours. I tried not to let it bother me after all. He had a demanding job, and I was the one staying home caring for my father. I figured it was just the stress of balancing everything. But deep down, I felt something was off. Jason was slipping away from me, and I couldn't figure out why. During those long nights sitting by my father's bedside, I started to notice just how lonely I had become. My father's health was rapidly declining, and I had no one to talk to about the overwhelming emotions that came with watching him deteriorate. I confided in Jason, but he was often distant or too tired to listen. It was as if he was physically present but emotionally absent. The person I had once turned to for comfort no longer seemed to care, and I was left to carry the weight of my grief. Alone. I wanted to believe that it was just temporary, that once my father recovered or things calmed down, everything would go back to normal, but it didn't. Instead, I felt more isolated than ever when my father finally passed away. I was devastated. The grief was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I couldn't imagine my life without him, and the thought of never hearing his voice again crushed me. Jason, sensing my pain, promised to be there for me to help me through the hardest time of my life. But I quickly learned that his promises were empty. The man who had once been my rock had become a shadow, someone who was no longer emotionally available. He started going on late-night business trips and weekend getaways each time he left. I felt a pang of dread in my chest. I tried to push those feelings away, convincing myself that everything was fine after all. He was my husband, and we had weathered storms before, hadn't we? It was only after the funeral that the real cracks began to show. I found myself sitting alone in our living room, staring at a photo of my father. Remembering all the good times we had shared, Jason had been distant that morning. Already talking about an upcoming work trip he needed to go on. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was just more business as usual. But something didn't feel right. His behavior had been erratic, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. The thought of him having an affair had crossed my mind more than once, but I pushed it aside. Jason loved me. He wouldn't betray me like that. Not after everything we had been through. But then came the moment that changed everything. It was the night of my father's wake, when I received the anonymous message, the picture of Jason with another woman. My heart stopped in my chest. As I stared at the image, unable to process what I was seeing. This woman wasn't a cousin or a colleague as he had claimed he was. His lover, the woman he had been spending his weekends with while I was at home, mourning my father. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. All the late nights. The unexplained trips. Every little detail that I had brushed off suddenly fell into place. Jason had been lying to me for months. I wanted to confront him right then to demand an explanation. But the shock held me, frozen. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. How long had this been going on? Was he planning to leave me? The anger bubbled up inside me, but more than anything I felt betrayed. How could he do this to me? To us, I had been there for him through everything, through his ups and downs, his achievements and failures. But when I needed him the most, he had turned his back on me, the rage inside. Me grew as I thought about the betrayal, and a single thought surged to the forefront of my mind. I would make him regret this. The days following the discovery of Jason's betrayal felt like an endless blur. I was walking through life on autopilot, doing what I had to do, but feeling as though I were detached from everything around me. My father's passing had already drained me, leaving me fragile, raw, and exposed. And now Jason had come along, stomping all over whatever semblance of stability I had left. The anger I felt wasn't immediate. It crept in slowly like a persistent itch that refused to be scratched. First came the disbelief, the denial that Jason, the man I had trusted with my heart, could betray me in such a cruel and heartless way. Then came the sorrow, the deep guttural ache of being discarded, of realizing that all the moments we had shared, the promises we had made to each other, meant nothing to him. I had given everything, and in return, he had given me nothing but lies. That first night after I saw the photo, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the image of Jason with the other woman burned into my mind. The more I thought about it, the more the pain morphed into something else, something darker, colder. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. How could he have done this to me, to us? How could he have thrown away everything we had built together for someone else, someone I didn't even know? The feeling of betrayal was suffocating, and it gnawed at me with every passing minute. 4 days. I walked around in a fog, trying to keep my emotions in check, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. The smallest things triggered flashes of anger. His empty side of the bed, his unspoken apologies, the reminders of everything he had promised me, only to have it all broken in an instant. I kept thinking about how he had lied, how he had deceived me for so long. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was a liar, a master of deceit, and he thought he could get away with it. I had trusted him, opened myself to him in ways I had never done with anyone else, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered relationship. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was no longer the woman I had been before. I wasn't just a victim of his betrayal. I was someone who had been pushed to the edge, and I was willing to fight back to make sure that he would feel the weight of what he had done. As I sat in my living room one evening, the weight of everything sinking in, a thought crossed my mind that sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about Jason anymore. It wasn't just about him lying or cheating. This was about me, about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. I had spent too long playing the role of the dutiful wife, always putting him first, always believing that everything would work out. But now I realized I needed to put myself first for once. If Jason thought he could get away with what he had done, then he was gravely mistaken. I was going to make sure he understood exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The first step in my plan was to gather as much information as I could. I needed to know the full extent of his betrayal, to uncover every hidden lie he had been telling me. I started going through his things, his emails, his phone messages, his social media accounts, anything that could give me a glimpse into what had been happening behind my back. It felt like an invasion of privacy, and part of me hated myself for doing it, but the other part knew it was necessary. I needed the truth, all of it. I couldn't confront him without knowing every detail of his deceit, and once I had the information, I would be ready. It wasn't long before I found the smoking gun Hudson had been texting the woman he had been with on the side, sending her messages about how much he missed her and how he couldn't wait to see her again. The messages were affectionate, full of endearments, and there was no doubt in my mind that this was more than just a fling. This was an emotional affair. Jason wasn't just having a physical relationship with this woman, he was emotionally invested in her. That realization hit me harder than anything else. He hadn't just betrayed me physically. He had given her a piece of his heart. I stared at the messages for a long time, trying to process the overwhelming flood of emotions that washed over me. I felt sick, betrayed, humiliated. But beneath all that, there was a simmering anger that was growing more intense by the minute. How dare he treat me this way? How could he so easily throw away the woman who had stood by him, who had been his partner in every sense of the word for someone else? I had given him my heart, my trust, and he had trampled all over it. The next few days passed in a blur of planning and strategy. I knew I had to be careful. If I confronted Jason too soon, he might try to manipulate the situation to twist things around and make me feel guilty for not trusting him. I couldn't let that happen. No, this time, I was going to be the one in control. I was going to make sure that Jason understood exactly what it felt like to have everything he took for granted ripped away from him. The idea of revenge started to take shape in my mind. It wasn't just about hurting him, it was about making him see the consequences of his actions, of making him understand the depth of the pain he had caused me. I wanted him to feel what it was like to lose everything, to have the world he had carefully built for himself crumbled beneath his feet. I would be the one to tear down the life he had created piece by piece. And so I began to put my plan into motion. It was a slow process, one that required patience and careful execution, but as the days passed, I found myself growing more determined. I had to make Jason pay for what he had done to me. He needed to know that I wasn't the naive, trusting wife he had always assumed I was. I was something else now, something stronger, something that would stop at nothing to get the as I deserved. But as I moved forward with my plan, there was a part of me that was afraid of what I was becoming, of how far I was willing to go to hurt the person I had once loved. But in the end, I realized that it didn't matter. I had been pushed to my breaking point, and I had no choice but to fight back. If Jason wanted a fight, he was going to get one that he would never forget. The idea of revenge wasn't new to me. It had been simmering beneath the surface ever since I first saw the photo of Jason with another woman. But now, with every passing day, the notion had begun to take shape. Becoming more than just an angry thought in my head, it had become a plan, one that I knew would be meticulous, calculated, and precise. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Jason deserved to feel the same heartache and betrayal that I had experienced. He thought he could get away with his lies. But I was about to show him how wrong he was. The first step of my plan was simple. Gather more evidence. I needed to know everything, every detail, every message, every piece of information that would further expose his betrayal. I started by retracing my steps. Thinking back to the moments I had ignored, the small signs that now seemed so obvious. The late nights he spent on his phone, the way he became protective of his devices, the way he'd taken more business trips than ever before. It all pointed in one direction. Deceit. I scoured through his emails, his phone bills, his social media accounts, all of which were piously hidden or erased. But Jason didn't count on one thing: my knowledge of him after years of being with him. I knew his routines, his passwords, his little tricks. It didn't take long for me to uncover a few things he hadn't expected me to find. There were more messages with the woman, even more explicit than the ones I had found before. The more I read, the more my anger grew. They had been seeing each other for months, meeting at hotels, sneaking around behind my back. And here I was left in the dark, grieving for my father while he was off living a life of deception. It was a sickening feeling realizing that all this time, I had been so oblivious to the truth. I had been too focused on my own grief to notice what was happening right under my nose. But now that I had the information, it was time to act. I knew that confronting him outright would only lead to lies and manipulation. So I needed a more subtle approach. I had to make him believe that he had gotten away with everything, that I was still the oblivious wife, so that I could deliver the most devastating blow when he least expected it. I started with small changes. I acted like everything was fine between us, like I had no idea what he had been up to. I was calm, collected, and methodical in my interactions with him. I didn't want him to suspect anything. He would still go on his business trips, still have his late nights, and I would be right here playing the role of the trusting wife. But inside I was calculating, biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came sooner than I had expected. One evening, Jason told me that he would be away for the weekend, attending another work event in a city I had never heard of. He seemed casual about it, as if nothing was amiss. But I knew this trip wasn't about work. I knew it was another weekend with her, and I was determined to make sure that this time, Jason wouldn't be the one controlling the narrative. I had a plan, and it involved the hotel he would be staying at. I wasn't going to just let him disappear for the weekend without consequences. I had called ahead, posing as someone from his office, and arranged a little surprise for him. I'd made sure the hotel staff was prepared, ready to give him a special welcome that would throw him off guard. They were instructed to treat him with extra attention, offer him an upgraded suite, and most importantly, leave a gift waiting for him in the room. It wasn't just any gift, though. It was a letter. A letter that would be the beginning of his downfall. The letter I crafted was a carefully worded message, one that looked innocent enough at first. But beneath the surface, it would cut deep. It was addressed to him from the secret admirer he had been meeting with. I included intimate details from their conversations, details that only the two of them knew. The letter would make him realize in no uncertain terms that I knew everything. It was a brilliant move, one that would catch him completely off guard and shatter the illusion he had so carefully built. I spent days preparing for the weekend. I was methodical, careful, and precise. I had arranged everything down to the smallest detail. I even went so far as to track his flight, making sure I knew exactly when he would be arriving at the hotel. I needed to know that everything would unfold according to plan. I had no room for mistakes. My emotions, though still raw, were under control. This was not about emotion anymore. This was about execution. I couldn't afford to let my anger cloud my judgment. As the weekend approached, I found myself filled with a strange sense of calm. I wasn't nervous or anxious, I was focused. I had spent so long letting Jason's actions hurt me, letting him believe that I was weak and naive. But now the tables had turned. He would no longer hold the power. I would be the one in control, orchestrating every step of this plan. With precision, the night before Jason's trip, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I went to bed early, curled up in the covers, and fell into a restless sleep. I had no intention of confronting him. That night, I needed him to leave first. I needed to know that he was out of my life, at least temporarily, before I executed my final move. The following morning, I watched him pack his suitcase. None the wiser, he kissed me goodbye, telling me to take care of myself. But I saw the glint in his eye. He was so sure that I had no idea. But I did. The hours dragged by. As I waited for him to reach his destination, I could feel my pulse quicken as the time drew closer. The hotel was expecting him. Now the staff was ready. Letter was waiting. Everything was set in motion when Jason finally checked into the hotel. Everything unfolded just as I had planned. The front desk gave him the upgraded room, and he was left alone with the letter. I waited in silence, feeling the tension build inside me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that when he read that letter, everything would change, and when I saw him again, he would no longer be the man I had married. He would be the man who had betrayed me, exposed for all to see. and I would finally have the upper hand. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. Jason had landed at the hotel, completely unaware of what awaited him. I sat in the quiet of my home, an unsettling calm washing over me as the seconds ticked by. My heart pounded, but there was a satisfaction in it. This wasn't just about getting even. This was about regaining control, about taking back the power that Jason had stolen from me. I had orchestrated this to perfection, and now it was his turn to face the consequences of his actions. I kept my phone close, waiting for any sign that my plan was unfolding as I had imagined. There was no turning back now. The hotel had confirmed that everything was in place: the letter, the special attention he would receive, and the gift waiting for him in his room. I had spent hours crafting that letter, making sure it was just the right balance of subtlety and sharpness. I needed it to expose him, to make him feel every ounce of the hurt he had caused, without him realizing that I was the one pulling the strings. As I waited, my mind kept replaying the moment when I first saw that image of Jason with the other woman. I thought of all the nights he had spent away from me, all the lies he had told, and the trust he had broken. I remembered how he'd always promised that he would be there for me, how he'd assured me that nothing could ever come between us. But now I knew better. His promises were empty, and the love I thought we shared was nothing more than a facade. I could feel the anger bubbling up again, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about rage anymore. This was about strategy, and I would make sure my revenge was as precise as it was satisfying. Then my phone buzzed, a text message from the hotel staff. Hewens arrived and checked in. The letter has been placed in the room. My pulse quickened. He was there reading the letter. The first blow had been struck, and now I could only imagine the look on his face as he read the words I had carefully written for him. It was surreal knowing that the man I had loved was now in the process of realizing just how much I knew about his betrayal. Couldn't help but picture his reaction. Would he feel a pang of guilt? Would he panic? I had no idea. But I knew one thing for sure: this would shake him to his core. He had been so confident, so sure that he could slip away unnoticed, but now he would have to face the truth, face the reality of the hurt he had caused. And there was no escaping it. He couldn't just brush it off. He couldn't just spin his lies like he always did. This time I was in control. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, my phone buzzed again, another message from the hotel staff. He's left the room in a hurry. The staff say he seemed agitated. We will keep an eye on the situation. My stomach flipped. Agitated? That was an understatement. Jason was unraveling, and I could practically hear the tension in his voice as he realized that his world was crumbling. I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. For once the tables were turned, and I was the one calling the shots. I sat there staring at my phone, waiting for him to call. I knew he would. Jason wasn't the type to just let things go. He had to be in control. And I had just shattered that illusion. I could only imagine what he was going through. How the lies he had told were now coming back to haunt him. Then the phone rang. I didn't hesitate. I answered it quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. But there was a slight tremor in it. Jason's voice came through sharp and frantic. "Dolly, where are you?" he asked, his tone unnervingly calm, almost like he was trying to regain control. "I need to talk to you. Something's wrong." I took a deep breath, studying myself. "What's wrong, Jason?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. I could hear the tension in his voice, the way he was struggling to keep his composure. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it this time. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "Listen," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "There's been a misunderstanding. I don't know how it happened, but you have to trust me. It's not what it looks like." The audacity of it, even now. After everything, he was still trying to cover his tracks. "Trust you?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "You've lied to me for months, Jason. I've seen the truth, and now you're telling me to trust you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him scrambling for words, trying to find a way to make this go away. "Molly, please," he said, his voice desperate now. "I swear I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I was confused. I thought, "Don't even try, Jason." I cut him off, my anger rising now. "You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to lie your way out of it. I know everything for the first time in our relationship. I felt a sense of power, a sense of finality. I wasn't the one caught in the lie anymore. I wasn't the one left in the dark in the cold begging for answers. Jason had no idea what to do now. He thought he could keep playing his games, but I had turned the table and now he was the one facing the consequences. I want you to listen. Very carefully, I continued, my voice steady. Despite the chaos swirling inside me. This is over, Jason. You've made your choices, and now you have to deal with the fallout. You've lost everything, your lies, your secrets, your so-called affair. It's all out in the open now. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I wondered if he had hung up, but then I heard his voice again, low and shaking. Molly. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear his apologies, his excuses. This wasn't about redemption. This was about justice, about making him understand the pain he had caused. Goodbye, Jason, I said, and hung up the phone. I sat there for a long moment, my heart pounding, my mind racing. It was over. The truth had been exposed, and there was no going back. The satisfaction I felt was bittersweet. It wasn't the kind of victory I had imagined, but it was a victory nonetheless. Jason had been forced to confront the truth, and I had made him realize the consequences of his actions. As I leaned back in my chair, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The anger, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it was all still there, but now it didn't matter. I had taken control. I had reclaimed my power, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The phone call ended with a sense of finality that I hadn't expected. Jason's desperate pleas were still ringing in my ears, but I was already moving past them, the person I had once loved. My husband, my partner, was no longer a part of my life. His actions, his lies, and his deceit had already sealed our fate, and no amount of regret or apologetic words could undo what had been done. It was over, the end of our marriage, the end of my trust, the end of my belief in what we had built together. As I sat there, the weight of everything settled in. I had carried the pain of his betrayal for so long, burying it beneath my grief for my father. But now that the dust had settled and the confrontation was behind me, I could feel the relief washing over me, almost as if the weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The anger that had been simmering for so long had given way to something else, something I wasn't sure I had expected. There was peace, quiet, a sense of closure that felt almost too foreign to embrace. I had fought for myself, for my dignity, and I had come out stronger on the other side. I couldn't lie to myself. There was still a part of me that missed him. The man I had married, the one I had believed in so fiercely, was gone. But in his place stood the reality of who he truly was. A man who had chosen to break my heart for his own selfish reasons. The man I had once loved was no more than a memory, a faded image I could barely recognize. And that was okay. I didn't need him in my life anymore. I had learned that the hard way. But now I had no choice but to accept it. But as I stood up and walked through our empty house, I realized that this was more than just the end of a relationship. This was the end of a chapter of my life, one that I had once believed would stretch on for years to come. And yet here I was standing at the threshold of something new. I had been broken by his betrayal. Yes, but I was also free from the lies, free from the doubts, and free to rebuild my life in a way that I hadn't thought possible before. The days that followed were a blur of emotions and decisions. I had to figure out the next steps. What to do with the house, where to go from here, and how to heal the wounds that had been left behind. But the one thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't going to let Jason's actions define me. I wasn't going to be the woman who was forever marked by her husband's betrayal. I was going to take control of my life, of my future, and I was going to do it on my own terms. In the weeks that followed, I found a sense of clarity that I had never expected. I took time for myself. Time to grieve not just my father's death, but also the end of a relationship that had meant everything to me. But I also took time to rediscover who I was outside of that marriage. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had lost in the process of loving Jason, how much of my own identity had been overshadowed by the role I had played as his wife. Now I was free to explore who I was, what I wanted, and where I wanted to go for the first time in a long time. I felt like I was truly living for myself. Jason, on the other hand, wasn't faring as well. The fallout from the exposure of his lies had been swift and unforgiving. His so-called affair had been laid bare for everyone to see, and the shame of it all had followed him like a dark cloud. He had tried to apologize, tried to explain himself, but there was no coming back from what he had done. The truth was out and it couldn't be erased. The relationships he had built, the trust he had once commanded were all destroyed. In an instant he had lost everything. Not just me, but the life he had so carelessly thrown away. I didn't know what would happen to him next. And honestly, I didn't care. His actions had consequences, and those consequences were his to deal with. But I had learned something important through all of this. I had to focus on myself, on my own healing, and on moving forward. I had spent so long putting others before me, allowing myself to be consumed by the pain of my father's death and the betrayal of my husband. But now I was reclaiming my life. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel a sense of normally return to my life. I started working on new projects, things I had put off while I had been in the relationship with Jason. I reconnected with old friends, rekindling relationships that had fallen by the wayside. I spent more time doing the things that made me happy, reading, writing, exploring new hobbies, and most importantly, learning to trust myself again. For the first time in a long time, I was proud of who I was becoming. I had faced the worst that life had thrown at me and had come out stronger on the other side. But there were moments when the memories of Jason still crept in, the times we had shared, the promises we had made. It was hard to completely erase those from my mind yet. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that the pain had dulled. It wasn't gone, but it wasn't as sharp as it had once been. I had forgiven myself for being deceived, for trusting the wrong person, and for letting myself be taken advantage of. I couldn't change the past, but I could control how I moved forward, and that was enough. I had learned to let go, and with that I found freedom. I no longer felt like I was tethered to the past, to the betrayal, to the pain. I was no longer the victim in my own story. I was the author of my own future, and that future was filled with endless possibilities. And as I stood in my new life, ready to take on whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: I was no longer afraid. The road ahead may not always be easy, but it would be mine to walk, and I would walk it with my head held high.